somewhere around $10,000. In this example, it was $11,200, and not all of that expensive. It's according to what you want. Of course, all of these are fact specific. So we also ask folks to make sure that they get those documents to us before they sign them. Most of the time, most of the funeral homes around here are familiar with this, and there's no problem. But you want to make sure that if you're going to put this money away, you're going to make sure that it does become an exempt asset in the eyes of Medicaid. So we just want to make sure that everything is done right. Go ahead. Again, we may purchase a vehicle. This is rare, but let's say, for example, Mary's car is from the 1990s and it's on its last leg. We may see fit to buy a new car just so Mary will have it there for Amanda to use on her behalf. Now, again, this is all fact specific. A lot of times when I have a client go into the nursing home, they'll still go to church. They'll still go out and visit relatives. Somebody will come and get them and take them out. So in that kind of situation, a vehicle makes sense. If you have someone that's basically immobile and they don't get out that much, then purchasing a car doesn't make any sense. All of these things are looked at on a case-by-case basis. There is no one-size-fits-all in Medicaid planning. So in this case, we decided to replace the car, buy a new one, $24,000. We title everything and do the insurance in a way that makes it okay for Medicaid, and we're good to go. Go ahead now. So now, because Mary is having to leave her home, unless there's some other way that we can protect the home, that home is going to have to go up for sale. A lot of people don't understand how property works in a Medicaid situation. The basic rule of thumb is this. In a married couple situation, because there's still one spouse living in the home, the house doesn't count, not an available asset. But once the house becomes empty, in this case, Mary leaving the house to go to the nursing home, then the house could have to be put up for sale in order to qualify for Medicaid. So we would be looking at what the values of those real estate are. We would be looking to see if we have to list it with a realtor. Do we have to get an opinion whether or not they think the property will sell in 90 days? We will be looking at all of those things at that time. And regardless of what we do, whether we can have a letter that it's unlikely to sell or we list it with a realtor, just by listing it and getting it up for sale, we've made the property exempt for this period of time. So we've taken care of it as far as trying to get Mary on Medicaid is concerned. We'll have to deal with it later, but for the purposes of getting the application approved, we've made it an exempt resource by putting it up for sale. Now, in this case, we've had a child living in the home for the last 2 years. So there are things that we can do under the Medicaid regulations to substantiate that Amanda has been living in the home, that without her in the home, Mary would have been in the nursing home years earlier. And if we can substantiate that to the approval of Medicaid, we can now transfer the home from Mary directly to Amanda with no penalty. It doesn't have to go for sale. It's protected. And a lot of times in a situation like that, so we now have a property going to one sibling. But remember, Amanda had 2 other siblings. So a lot of times we will go ahead and prepare 2 deeds, one from the parent to the child, and then one from the child to put her siblings on with it to make sure that mom's wishes under her will are eventually going to be honored. And once we get through all of those hoops with Medicaid, getting affidavits and physician statements and things like that, we can transfer the residence, no problem, instead of it being sold. So it's like I said, consistent with Mary's desires, Amanda also agrees that upon any sale of the house, she's going to split the proceeds with her siblings. So we've protected the property through one sibling, but then that sibling is going to go and then honor the wishes of their mother and split everything among all the siblings as it would be under the will or the law of intestacy. Go ahead. So in this case, if you recall, we started with $285,000. We protected money in some ways by buying things that benefited the elder in Mary's case. So in this case, we've paid for Mary's funeral. We've bought Mary a new car that'll be used to take her out of the nursing home for church or visits or things like that. We've protected all the money that we paid to Amanda that would otherwise have gone to the nursing home or long-term care. We've protected the lot right now by using reasonable efforts to sell it. We've protected the entire house by being able to transfer it to Amanda. So, and then Mary's able to keep $2,000. So out of her $285, we've protected or spent for Mary's benefit everything except $28,308. So by working with us from the very beginning, we were able to put this in place. Otherwise, Amanda may not have been able to pay herself. She wouldn't have known anything about doing the ability to purchase the car or the life care contracts or anything like that. So we put a lot of this in place just by coming to see what we could do, just asking the question, this is what mama's like now. Is there anything we can do? Go ahead. So as we talked about transfers, they all have to be done with, and 5 years has to pass, the 5-year look back period. Any uncompensated transfer results in a penalty period, a period of ineligibility for Medicaid long-term care, and the penalty begins once the application is filed. If we aren't through the 5-year period, say we've made it through 4.5 years, and then you go to apply for Medicaid, you're going to be denied, and the penalty is going to be the entire penalty. So a lot of times we will run the numbers and look at everything, and it may be better off to private pay for 6 months to get us through the 5-year penalty period, then we can apply for Medicaid. So again, all of these are on a case-by-case basis. These are just giving you examples of what we look at and what we can do in order to try to protect as many of the assets as possible. So let's look at how the transfer penalty is calculated. You take the amount of the transfer and you divide it by what Medicaid calls a penalty divisor. In this case, in our area of Virginia, that divisor is 6,422. So, for example, if you give away, what's this number? If we give away $100,000, our penalty is going to be 15.5 months, roughly, because 100,000 divided by 6,422 is 15.57. So that's going to be the penalty period that nobody's going to be eligible for Medicaid for. Likewise, if we give away a bigger number, 466,000, the penalty is going to be over 5 years, 72, that's 6 years, excuse me, 72.56. So that's how the penalty period works. The penalty, the length of the penalty is based on the amount that has been transferred or gifted out of the elder's name. Go ahead. So let's look, instead of the situation we had before where we had been working with a person from the very beginning of their long-term care needs and through home care and the caregivers. Let's say now we just have a crisis situation and daddy's gone into the nursing home and children are here wanting to know what, if anything, they could do. So there's a rule in the Medicaid manual that states once a penalty has been assessed, we need to change the spelling of assessed, and payment for services has been denied, a return of the assets or use of the assets for the benefit of the applicant requires a retroactive evaluation, including an erasure or partial erasure of the penalty period. And this rule gives rise to the transfer and pay for care strategy that we utilize for a lot of our single clients. Go ahead now. So in this case, let's imagine Amanda's just coming to me and we didn't do any of the caregiver stuff and we still got the same amount of assets, $285,000, and the home has been sold. Everything has been transferred out. So we've only kept the $2,000 that Mary is able to keep. So we transferred everything else out to the children. Go ahead. So because Mary has less than $2,000, she is eligible for Medicaid, but for the gift we've just made. So in this case, the gift we've just made results in a 44.37 month penalty. So some of you may be thinking, okay, mama's got no money and she's got this penalty period for the nursing home that Medicaid won't pay. What happens? Who pays the nursing home? Go ahead, Mel. So we've accomplished our goal of getting Mary approved for Medicaid, but for the penalty. So now we have to cure the penalty. So once this occurs and we've been approved, but for the penalty, the children, out of the money that we have transferred to them, that money is set up in a separate standalone account in the name of the children. It's not commingled with any of their money. This is a standalone account. They use that money to pay the balance of Mary's nursing home bill each month. Now notice I said balance, because when you go into the nursing home, barring some unforeseen circumstance, your income goes with you. So if you recall from an earlier slide, Mary has an income of $14.92 a month. So that goes to the nursing home, and what the children will be paying is the balance out of the transferred money each month. Go ahead now. So if the nursing home bill is $6,000 a month and Mary's income is $14.92 a month, the children are going to have to come up with $45.08 a month to pay for mama's nursing home bill. Now, they'll pay that bill, and there may be a couple of other bills they pay during the month. If mother has a supplemental Medicare policy, they'll keep paying that premium on that policy. That's fine to keep. And there may be some incidentals in the nursing home. Most of our clients will pay 2 or 3 bills a month out of this transferred money. Go ahead, ma'am. Every time those children make a payment to the nursing home, it's like giving back a little bit of the gift, because they have done it on behalf of Mary, the person who made the gift. So we keep up with this payment every month. And my legal assistants put this in a spreadsheet. We keep track of it every month. And we'll get to a point where we'll call the child in charge of the checking account, and we'll tell them, stop paying the nursing home, don't pay any more. And then we will go back to Medicaid, and in this case, we will remind Medicaid that we reported a gift of $285,000. Since that time, the children have paid $135,783.13 on behalf of mama's care. In this case, they paid for a period of months. By giving that much back, or paying that much on behalf of their mother, they've reduced the gift now to $149,216.87. And that reduced the penalty period to a period of time that is already passed. So the gift has been cured, mother is now eligible for Medicaid, and we've protected almost $150,000. Go ahead now. So that's a single person. So remember, for a single person going into the nursing home, we're looking to protect roughly half of the assets they have at that time. And whether or not we would have to sell the real estate is determined on a case-by-case basis. Now, let's look at a married couple. The basic asset test for the spouse, we'll talk about that. The countable asset limit is still $2,000 for the person applying for Medicaid. In this case, because we have a spouse, we have some other avenues for exemption that we can use exempt assets. The biggest one being the home. Like I said, if the spouse is in the home is exempt. And here we also have what's called a community spouse resource allowance. This is the amount of money that even the government would let the spouse keep if they were applying for Medicaid. Go ahead, Mel. So, how do we calculate the amount of money that the spouse can keep by law? First, we have to come up with an entire list of assets that the couple owned on their snapshot date. Now, this date is the first day of the first month of continuous institutionalization. So if you go into the nursing home on May 30th, May 1st is your snapshot date. So my legal assistants will be asking the spouse or their children or whoever's in charge for a lot of information. We're going to need account statements. We're going to need statements from insurance companies, IRAs, 401ks. We have to determine the value of everything as of May 1st. Then once we come up with that number, we can determine what the spousal share will be. In this case, you'll see that the spousal share has a maximum of $126,420 and a minimum of $25,284. Now, let's address one misconception right now that people have. People think because the way the CSRA is calculated, that the spouse gets to keep 1/2 of the assets. That's true to a degree, but that 1/2 is based on a maximum and a minimum. So let's look at how that's determined now. Go to the next slide. So if you have $30,000 on your snapshot date, the minimum you get to keep is $25,728. And that way, $4,272 is allocated to the Medicaid spouse. So in this case, the spouse got to keep much more than half because they didn't have that many assets and they got to keep the entire minimum CSRA. Go ahead now. Let's look at a $300,000 snapshot amount. If we do math, and even I can do this math, half is $150,000. As you can see, the spouse does not get to keep $150,000. They only get to keep the max, $128,640. So that means everything else would go into what you may have heard as called spin down. So if you have this situation that's on the screen now, and you do not come to me, you are going to be spending $169,360 unnecessarily because there are ways we can protect that money. And even worse would happen is if you start with $300,000 and you start spending in the nursing home and do not consult an attorney. Because by the time you figure out, hey, if you go see Haley, you might be able to save something, your snapshot amount may now, while your snapshot amount was $300,000, you may have already spent $120,000. So the time to come to see if anything can be done is before something happens. What I tell my clients is, it's happening more and more, quite frankly, but for the most part, something happens to take you from the house to the hospital. After you're in the hospital, you go to rehab. Now, rehab is cared for by your Medicare. And if you have a supplement, Medicare and your supplement may pay for 100% of that rehab. But that rehab is only for a maximum of 100 days. If you're not able to go home after your rehab, you're on skilled care. There is no Medicare for skilled care. So that's when private pay starts. So the time to come see me is either in the hospital or during rehab. So we can start putting things together. If you rehab and go home, fine. We were ready, but we didn't have to do anything. But if you're not able to go home, we're ready to go with an asset protection plan and a Medicaid application from day one to protect the maximum amount of assets possible. Go ahead. So let's look at some of the other things that we can use. The government bonds, again, that's only going to get you a year, but sometimes we can use it. Most of the time, we will use a spousal annuity. These are special kind of Medicaid compliant annuities. It's not the annuity you would get from a bank or anything like that. Most of the time, we have to liquidate those annuities. These are very specified, specific annuities. And with those, we can protect virtually all the spend down money. We've had a few cases where we've had to use other strategies, but for the most part, the go-to is the Medicaid compliant annuity. And sometimes we'll use promissory notes. We can use promissory notes and structure them in a way where they're kind of like an annuity. And so we use those in very select situations, but it's just another arrow in our quiver that we can use to make sure that we can take care of all of our clients. So let's look at a case study. Henry and Liz have been married for 53 years. Henry's very overweight. He's had a series of strokes and mini strokes. leaving him partially paralyzed. He needs assistance with all of his activities of daily living. Liz is relatively healthy, no major medical problems, but she's a very petite woman. She's been having greater and greater difficulty trying to take care of Henry at home alone. This is unfortunately a situation we see all too often, and a lot of times the spouse who's trying to be the caregiver is really hurting their own health and well-being by trying to do all of this alone. Now Liz is looking to nursing homes, but she's worried about having to use their life savings in order to pay for Henry's care. Very typical situation. Go ahead. So, like I said, the first thing we're going to do is put together that asset list. So in this case, we've got financial accounts, we've got CDs, we've got vehicles, we've got prepaid funerals already paid for. So we've got a total $298,000 between Henry and Liz. And Henry's income is $1,800. Now let me say a word about that. When we're looking at their assets, everybody's assets count. Henry's assets count. Liz's assets count. Joint assets count. On the asset side of the equation, everything comes in. On the income side, only Henry's income will come into play as far as the nursing home and Medicaid is concerned. And there are even some ways where we can protect that. But assets, everybody's counts. Income, only the Medicaid spouse's income. Go ahead, Mel. So we know what Liz's shelter expenses are. You know, a lot of times people ask, why do we ask all these questions on our questionnaire? Because it's pretty thorough and pretty long. But there's a reason behind all of our madness. So we have to know what Liz, is the spouse that's still in the home, is paying for. So we find out what her homeowner's insurance are, and that's a monthly amount. We'll divide that annual premium by 12. The electric bill, water and sewer, heating and cooling. So we come up with a number of what it takes for the shelter expenses for that spouse. And we have that number in case we need it. And I'll show you that later. Go ahead. So in this case, we've got $198,000 worth of countable assets. Liz is going to be able to keep the max $128,640. And with no other planning, they would be spending down $167,360. So go ahead now. So go ahead. So there's the current resources, how much we can save for Liz through the CSRA. Now, we might buy a new vehicle. Say Liz has got an old car. She's going to be driving a lot now to go visit Henry in the nursing home. Maybe we'll spend the money on a new car. Maybe not. We'll definitely get the funerals if they're not done. Maybe some bonds. Henry's always able to keep less than $2,000. And so we've still got to get down to, we've got to be able to protect a little over $100,000 even after making these purchases that will benefit Henry and Liz. So here we're going to use a spousal annuity. We're going to purchase, in this case, we purchased a 5-year annuity for Liz. It's going to pay her a little over $2,000 a month for 5 years, for 60 months. And the total payout is going to come to a little over $122,000. Not a lot of interest on an annuity these days. And when we're looking at structuring an annuity for the spouse, we're going to look at different years, because if you get an annuity that's less than 4 years long, you're going to have to pay an administrative fee. If we're taking money out of an IRA to move it to a qualified annuity, there may be some tax ramifications when the annuity starts to pay out. So we're really doing a lot of work trying to figure out the best way to structure this annuity. So what we're showing you is just what happened in this case. So once we're able to put that money in the Medicaid compliant annuity, we've eliminated the need for all the spend down of that money. It is now an exempt asset, as long as that annuity is set up in accordance with the strict guidelines under the Medicaid regulations. So the total of summary of what we've done is we have our CSRA in place. Go ahead. We've got the new vehicle, prepaid funerals, the bonds that we may have purchased, what Henry's able to keep, and the rest we protected via an annuity. That'll be the payout over the 5 years. So if you recall, they started with 285. They're actually going to have a little bit more than that because of some gains in the way that these things are structured and what we're being able to keep. It's not always that way. It's based on the annuity payout. But what you can see is we've protected everything. You don't see any checks going to the nursing home. It's all going to the benefit of Liz or Henry. It's staying within the couple. Go ahead, man. All right. Does anybody have any questions? How are we on time? Oh, good.
Good. We're good on time.
So again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat feature. I'm monitoring that and I can read those questions to Mr. Haley. And if not, I can go one by one and unmute the participants if you would like to ask your question in person. But we'll wait a couple minutes to see if anyone has any questions via chat.
Sure.
And while we're waiting, again, I want to thank you both, Mr. Haley and Mr. Rohr, for taking your time and doing this for us. It's been a great presentation. I've learned a lot and I hope our participants have as well. I love listening to your sessions. It's been great so far this year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, so Kathy said, is there an income limit to apply for Medicaid?
No, not really, because let's say a person draws $5,000 a month. That won't pay the nursing home. So you could, in theory, apply for Medicaid to pay for the balance. The only income limit would be as if your income will pay the bill. A lot of times we'll have a situation where people will have long-term care insurance, but it doesn't pay the entire bill for the nursing home. So if you have a situation like that, that long-term care insurance is just treated as another source of income. So again, if your income, your pension, your long-term care, if all of that stacks up and it still doesn't pay the nursing home bill, we can apply for Medicaid.
Okay. And Kathy had another question. How about PPL in the home?
That's one of the things that is set up when we use community-based care for our clients. PPL is the way that the caregiver payments and everything are set up. And we have had situations where we would get family members, most of the time children, they would become the person's caregiver and they would be the person paid for by Medicaid under PPL. So we are familiar with that.
Okay. She said, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
All right. Any more questions via the chat? If you want, you can also raise your hand on Zoom if you're joining by a computer or an iPad, if you'd like me to unmute you. Do we have anyone else with any more questions?
While we're waiting this last little bit, I would remind everybody, and it's on the screen, we do have offices in Bath and in Danville. And quite frankly, we're becoming pretty adept at video conference appointments. So we will take appointments from anybody in the state of Virginia. And we are doing that for our clients during this time. We've had quite a few telephone consultations. We've had video conference consultations. We've had FaceTime consultations. And so we certainly have that ability. Mal creates a newsletter for us every month. You can go to our website and sign up for that. Subscribe to my blog for current articles that come out. And probably the best resource is our Facebook page, because we try to keep our social media up to date and it may alert you to something that is new on the website.
Awesome. All right. Well, I will go down the list one by one to unmute, just to give everyone an opportunity to ask a question if they have one.
Sure.
Okay, Kathy Carter, I'm going to start with you. Kathy, do you have any questions for Mr. Haley?
I do not have any questions, but I thank you. It was very informative.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, Darlene. Darlene, do you have any questions? Okay. And our Galaxy S9 user, and if I could get your name, that'd be great. Okay. Helen? Helen, do you have any questions for Mr. Haley?
Let's see. I don't have any questions right now, but it was very informative. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome.
All right, and Kathy, you've already asked yours, but do you have any more questions for Mr. Haley? Do you have any more questions for Mr. Haley, Kathy? Okay.
No.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Maria, I'm going to unmute you. Do you have any questions for Mr. Haley? Okay, it's not letting me unmute you, Maria. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me or Mr. Haley and we'll get those answers to you if you have any. All right, Simone, do you have any questions for Mr. Haley? Okay.
I did enjoy it. No questions, but will you be able to have this out on the website?
You're gonna post the,
We will be posting excerpts from this particular presentation because due to the length, it's kind of a cumbersome video to put together, but there will be chunks of this presented at different times this month and the next coming month.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Great question. All right. Well, if that is all the questions that you all have for us today, I would like to thank you again for joining us in this great presentation from Mr. Robert Haley. We actually have another event with him scheduled, and I'm hoping that he will do again live stream.
sure.
Awesome. So again, I did mention earlier today that tomorrow NCI is partnering with Dr. Eric Jardine from Virginia Tech on Policing the Dark Web, a futile undertaking, which is going to be a great presentation about the efforts that police officers have to use in monitoring the dark web. So if you'd like to join us for that, that begins at 11 a.m. to noon tomorrow. And if you want more information, just give me an email at bstanley@newcollegeinstitute.org or give me a call at 276-403-5605. And then our next live event will be on May 20th, which is going to be Songs and Stories from the Virginia Coalfields with Tyler Hughes. And we'll be discussing the musical traditions of the Appalachian region. And again, I invite you all to join us for these next events and to join us back for Mr. Haley's event in June. All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys for joining. And thank you, Kathy, for joining as well.